My face was pressed so hard against the wet asphalt I could taste the grit. My arms wrenched backward while 3 red laser sights danced across my chest. I wasn't a criminal. I was a freelance accountant. But the tactical officers screaming that I'd nearly killed a man didn't care. The morning of October 14th started like any other dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday in Portland, Oregon. I was standing in my kitchen, wearing oversized flannel pajamas, waiting for my French press to steep. My biggest worry at 6:45 a.m. was whether I had enough time to finish a quarterly tax report for a client before my 9 a.m. Zoom meeting. I was just reaching for my favorite ceramic mug when the explosion happened. It wasn't a bomb, though the concussive force rattling the floorboards made my brain register it as one. It was my front door violently imploding inward, the heavy oak frame splintering into 100 jagged pieces as a steel battering ram tore through the deadbolt. "Police! Get on the ground! Do it now!" The screaming was simultaneous, overlapping, and deafening. Before I could even drop the mug, which shattered against the terracotta tiles, sending scalding coffee splashing across my bare ankles, 3 massive figures clad in dark tactical gear and heavy Kevlar vests stormed into my narrow hallway. "Show me your hands. Get down. Face the floor." I froze, my mind completely short-circuiting. I remember staring at the muzzle of a matte black Glock 19 pointed directly at the space between my eyes. The officer holding it had a face rigid with adrenaline, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. "I said, get on the ground, Jessica," he roared, lunging forward. Jessica. He knew my name. Why did he know my name? Before I could articulate a single syllable, a heavy hand grabbed the back of my pajama shirt, violently yanking me downward. My knees hit the hard tiles with a sickening crack, followed instantly by the side of my face. The sheer physical shock of the takedown stole the breath from my lungs. A heavy boot planted itself firmly between my shoulder blades, pinning me to the floor. "Hands behind your back. Stop resisting," a second voice yelled. I'm not doing anything." I finally managed to gasp, my voice a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. I tried to comply, but the awkward angle of my shoulder made it difficult. The officer didn't wait. He grabbed my left wrist, twisting it sharply upward with a jolt of white-hot pain that made me scream, and slapped a cold, heavy steel handcuff onto it. The ratcheting sound of the metal teeth biting down on my skin was the most terrifying noise I had ever heard. The right wrist quickly followed. "Jessica Harper, you are under arrest for felony hit-and-run, vehicular assault, and fleeing the scene of a crime." A deep, authoritative voice boomed from above me. I lay there, my cheek resting in a puddle of hot coffee and broken ceramic, trying to process the absolute absurdity of the words. "Vehicular assault? Hit and run? There's a mistake," I sobbed, the panic finally breaking through the shock. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the spilled coffee. "You have the wrong house. You have the wrong person. I haven't even been in my car since Sunday. Save it for the precinct, lady," the officer pinning me down muttered. He hoisted me up by my biceps, a maneuver that sent shooting pains radiating through my collarbones. As they dragged me out of my own kitchen, I caught a glimpse of my living room. 2 other officers were already tearing through my belongings, pulling drawers from my desk and tossing paperwork onto the floor. I was shoved out the ruined front door and into the biting October morning air. The street was bathed in the chaotic, strobing glare of red and blue lights. 3 police cruisers and an unmarked black SUV were parked haphazardly across my lawn and driveway. My neighbors, people I waved to every single morning, were standing on their porches, clutching their robes, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. Mrs. Gable from next door had her hand covering her mouth. I was a 32-year-old woman with a perfect credit score and a golden retriever named Barnaby, who was currently whining from the backyard. I had never even received a speeding ticket, yet here I was, being frog-marched down my driveway in soaked pajamas, treated like a cartel boss. An officer with a thick moustache and a name tag that read Jenkins forced my head down and pushed me into the claustrophobic, hard plastic back seat of a cruiser. The door slammed shut, cutting off the ambient noise of the neighborhood, leaving me in a suffocating, terrifying silence. I twisted my body, trying to relieve the agonizing pressure on my shoulders from the handcuffs. I closed my eyes, desperately trying to wake up from what had to be a nightmare. But the sharp bite of the metal cutting into my wrists was entirely real. "Vehicular assault," I whispered to the empty car. My mind raced back to the previous night. I had been home all evening. I ordered Thai takeout at 7 p.m., watched 2 episodes of a baking show, and went to sleep by 10:30 p.m. My car, a dark blue Toyota Camry, was parked right where I left it. Wait. I strained my neck to look out the barred window toward my driveway. My car wasn't there. A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than the police officer's boot, settled into the pit of my stomach. My car was gone. The precinct smelled like stale sweat, cheap floor wax, and burnt coffee. I was shivering violently. Not just from the adrenaline crash, but because the interrogation room they had left me in was aggressively air-conditioned. I was still in my thin, coffee-stained pajamas. I had been sitting alone at the bolted-down steel table for what felt like hours. The only object in the room was a heavy iron ring welded to the center of the table, and they had mercifully uncuffed my hands from behind my back, only to cuff my right wrist to that ring. Finally, the heavy metal door clicked open. A man walked in. He was in his late 40s, wearing a rumpled grey suit with a loosened tie. He carried a thick manila folder and a digital voice recorder. He pulled out the metal chair opposite me and sat down, dropping the folder onto the table with a loud, theatrical thud. "I'm Detective Harrington," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any empathy. He clicked the recorder on. "Jessica Harper, do you know why you're here?" "No," I pleaded, my voice trembling violently. "I swear to God, I have no idea. The officer said something about a hit and run, but my car was stolen. I just realized it when they put me in the cruiser. Someone stole my car." Harrington didn't blink. He just stared at me, a hollow, skeptical gaze that made me feel entirely guilty despite my innocence. "Stolen?" he repeated slowly. "That's the angle we're going with? Because you didn't report it stolen, Jessica. And it wasn't hot-wired. The ignition is perfectly intact." "I didn't know it was gone until this morning," I cried out. "I work from home. I haven't driven it since Sunday grocery shopping." Harrington sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He opened the folder. "Let me tell you a story, Jessica," he began, ignoring my protests. "Last night, at approximately 11:45 p.m., a dark blue Toyota Camry ran a red light at the intersection of Burnside and 14th. It broadsided a station wagon driven by a 48-year-old man named Theo Kensington. The impact was so severe, it flipped Mr. Kensington's car twice. He is currently at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, on a ventilator, with massive internal bleeding and a fractured skull. He might not make it through the week," I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "Oh my God, that's horrible." "It gets worse," Harrington continued, his eyes narrowing. "The driver of the Camry didn't stop to check on Theo. The driver threw the car into reverse, abandoning the severely damaged vehicle 3 blocks away in an alley, and fled on foot." "But it wasn't me!" I shouted, yanking instinctively against the handcuff chain, causing it to rattle loudly against the table. "I was home!" Check my phone records. Check my internet router. I was home. Harrington reached into the folder and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. He tossed it onto the center of the table. Inside the bag was a familiar, rectangular piece of plastic. "When our officers processed the abandoned Camry," Harrington said softly, leaning in, "they found a handbag on the passenger side floorboard. It must have spilled open during the collision, and sitting right there, next to the gear shift, was this." I stared at the object in the bag. It was an Oregon driver's license. My face. My name. Jessica Ann Harper. My mind spun furiously. I instinctively reached toward my left pajama pocket, forgetting I didn't have my actual purse with me. "That's impossible," I stammered. "My ID is in my wallet. My wallet is in my purse on my kitchen counter." I literally used it yesterday to order food online. We checked your kitchen counter, Harrington countered smoothly. There's a purse. Yes. But no ID. No driver's license. No. No, I muttered, the puzzle pieces violently colliding in my head. If my ID was in the car, and I had my physical wallet, and then it hit me. A sickening, world-tilting wave of nausea washed over me. The spare ID. 3 months ago, I had lost my wallet at a coffee shop. I panicked, immediately went to the DMV, and ordered a replacement license. 2 days later, a Good Samaritan found my original wallet and mailed it back to me. I kept the replacement ID in a small lockbox in my bedroom closet, along with my passport and the spare key to my Camry. Only one other person in the world knew about that lockbox. Only one other person had the passcode to my house. My younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was a hurricane of bad decisions. We were biologically sisters, just 18 months apart, but fundamentally opposites. While I built a quiet, stable life, Vanessa chased chaos. She had a history of DUIs, a string of toxic ex-boyfriends, and a crippling addiction to prescription painkillers that my parents had bankrolled 3 separate rehab stints to fix. 2 weeks ago, she showed up at my house unannounced, crying, saying she needed a place to crash just for an hour to take a shower and regroup before a job interview. I let her in. I made her lunch. I left her alone in the house while I walked Barnaby. She had been in my bedroom. She had taken the spare key. She had taken the spare ID. It was Vanessa, I whispered, the betrayal burning hot in my throat. I looked up at Detective Harrington. My sister. She looks just like me. We have the same hair, same height. She must have taken my spare key and my backup license. She's the one who was driving. Harrington's expression didn't soften. He actually let out a dry, humorless chuckle. The evil twin defense. That's a classic, Jessica. She's not my twin, but she looks exactly like me. Look at her record. Pull up Vanessa Harper in your system. I was begging now, tears of sheer desperation blurring my vision. She has a suspended license. She took my ID, so if she got pulled over, she could pretend to be me. Please. You have to believe me. Before Harrington could reply, the heavy door opened again. A man in a sharp navy suit stepped in, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Darian, my attorney, whom my frantic neighbor Mrs. Gable must have called. Detective Harrington, we're done here, Darian said briskly, moving to my side and placing a comforting hand on my trembling shoulder. My client is asserting her right to silence. Harrington stood up slowly, gathering his folder. Fine by me, counselor, but you should probably tell your client to stop blaming her sister. Why? Darian asked, his brow furrowing. Harrington smirked, a cruel twisting of his lips. Because we already spoke to Vanessa Harper an hour ago. She was working a double shift at a downtown diner until 2 a.m. last night. We have 12 witnesses and a time card proving it. Oh, and one more thing. Harrington pulled a tablet from his pocket, tapped the screen, and placed it in front of Darian and me. It was grainy, black and white security footage from a pawn shop across the alley where my Camry was abandoned. The timestamp read 11:49 p.m. The video showed my crumpled car screeching to a halt. The driver's side door kicked open. A woman stumbled out into the rain. She was wearing my distinctive yellow raincoat. She turned toward the camera for just a second as she ran away. It wasn't Vanessa. It was me. I stared at the frozen frame on Detective Harrington's tablet, the oxygen completely evaporating from my lungs. The woman in the grainy black and white video had my cheekbones. She had my chin. She was wearing the exact same bright yellow Patagonia torrential rain jacket I had bought at an REI in the Pearl District 3 years ago. But it wasn't me. That's impossible, I whispered, the room spinning around me. I was asleep. Darian, my attorney, leaned closer to the screen. His jaw set. He didn't look at Harrington. He looked at me. His eyes searched mine for a fraction of a second, looking for a lie. Whatever he saw in my terrified, tear-streaked face must have convinced him, because his demeanor shifted from cautious defense attorney to absolute attack dog. Detective, this video is low resolution, shot at midnight in a torrential downpour from at least 50 feet away. Darian snapped, pushing the tablet back across the steel table. You have a woman with similar features wearing a common brand of raincoat. That is not a definitive identification. My client has no history of violence, no traffic infractions, and no motive to broadside a random stranger. The ID in the car provides the identification. Counselor, Harrington fired back, looking incredibly smug. The video just puts the nail in the coffin. The district attorney is pushing for no bail. She's a flight risk with a vehicle. A vehicle she allegedly abandoned at the scene, Darian countered smoothly. We're done here. Don't say another word, Jessica. The next 48 hours were a blur of institutional grey walls, blinding fluorescent lights, and sheer psychological torture. I was processed through the Multnomah County Detention Center, stripped of my coffee-stained pajamas, and forced into an itchy, oversized orange jumpsuit. I sat in a holding cell with women who looked at me like I was fresh meat, shivering in the corner, unable to eat the stale bologna sandwiches they slid through the slot. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blinding headlights of my own car smashing into Theo Kensington's station wagon. Darian fought like hell at the arraignment. The judge, a stern woman with a zero-tolerance reputation, set bail at a staggering $500,000. I had to put a lien on the house I had spent 7 years meticulously paying off just to afford the bond. When Darian finally drove me back to my house on Thursday evening, the reality of my ruined life hit me with the force of a freight train. My front door was boarded up with cheap plywood. Inside, my sanctuary had been violated. The police had tossed everything. Couch cushions were slashed. Flour and sugar containers from my pantry were dumped on the hardwood. And my home office was a hurricane of scattered client files. Barnaby, my golden retriever, was thankfully safe, Mrs. Gable next door had taken him in, but the house felt profoundly empty and cold. Don't touch anything yet, Darian said gently, standing in the doorway of my trashed living room. He was in his usual sharp suit, but he had taken off his tie, and he looked almost as exhausted as I felt. We need to document this, but more importantly, we need to figure out how Vanessa pulled this off. I walked numbly into my bedroom. The closet doors were off their tracks. I stepped over a pile of my own shoes and went straight to the back corner. I dropped to my knees and pulled up the loose floorboard where I kept my fireproof lockbox. The lid was pried open. My spare key, I said, my voice trembling. My backup ID, my passport, all gone. Darian squatted next to me, taking a pen from his pocket and using it to flip the lid open further, preserving any fingerprints. If Vanessa stole them, she planned this. This wasn't a joyride gone wrong. It was a calculated setup. But why? I cried, burying my face in my hands. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. I've given her money. I've paid for her rehab. I let her stay here. Why would she frame me for a felony? Darian stood up, pacing the length of my ruined bedroom. Motive. In criminal law, it always comes down to motive. What does she gain by you going to prison? I shook my head. Nothing. I'm a freelance accountant. I don't have millions stashed away. We're not. I stopped. The blood drained from my face. The Hastings Trust. Oh my God, I breathed, grabbing the edge of the bed frame to steady myself. Our grandfather, Alex Hastings. When he died, he left an estate worth about $1.4 million in a blind trust. Darian stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. Go on. It was structured strictly, I explained, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The money is locked until the youngest sibling turns 35, but there's a morality clause. Grandfather hated our father's criminal history, so he stipulated that if either Vanessa or I are ever convicted of a felony, we forfeit our half of the trust entirely. The remaining sibling gets the full sum immediately. Darian exhaled slowly. And Theo Kensington? The victim? I've never heard that name in my life. I have, Darian said, his voice dropping an octave. He pulled out his phone, scrolling rapidly. I had my paralegal do a background check on Kensington while you were in lockup. Theo Kensington isn't just a random driver. He's a senior fraud investigator for Pacific Continental Insurance. The puzzle pieces were snapping together with terrifying speed, forming a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. Vanessa had a slip-and-fall claim pending, I said, my voice barely a whisper. 6 months ago, she claimed she hurt her spine at a grocery store and sued for $100,000. My parents mentioned it, but I told them to stay out of it because it sounded like a scam. Kensington was the investigator assigned to her claim, Darian confirmed, looking up from his screen. He was scheduled to testify at her fraud hearing next Tuesday, a hearing that would have likely sent her to prison for insurance fraud, triggering the morality clause and losing her the inheritance. Vanessa hadn't just gotten drunk and crashed my car. She had hunted Theo Kensington down. She intentionally rammed his car to silence him before he could testify against her. And she wore my clothes, drove my car, and planted my ID so that I would take the fall, ensuring she not only escaped prison but inherited the entire $1.4 million. It was a masterclass in sociopathic cruelty. We need the video, I said, a sudden spark of furious, burning resolve igniting in my chest. The tears stopped. I was done crying. Darian, get the pawn shop video. I need to see it again. Because if she planned this, she made a mistake. She always makes a mistake. By midnight, we were sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by empty coffee cups from Stumptown, and files Darian had illegally copied from the discovery packet. He had managed to get a high-definition, raw file of the pawn shop security footage. We watched it on his laptop for the 50th time. The dark blue Camry screeched into the alleyway. The driver's door kicked open. The woman in my yellow Patagonia raincoat stumbled out. She paused, looking directly up at the camera, a deliberate move to get her face recorded before pulling the hood up and sprinting away into the rain. Look at her face, Darian muttered, leaning back and rubbing his temples. It's uncanny, Jessica. Even knowing what I know, if I had to testify, I'd say that's you. She knows how to mimic my posture, I said coldly, watching my sister wear my life like a stolen Halloween costume. But look closely. Pause it right when she slams the car door shut. Darian tapped the spacebar. The frame froze. Zoom in on her hands, I instructed. Darian used his trackpad to magnify the driver's side door. The image pixelated slightly, but the detail was clear enough. The woman in the video had forcefully slammed the heavy car door shut using her left hand. I'm right-handed, I stated, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I do everything with my right hand. If I'm panicked and running away from a crash, my instinct is to push the door shut with my dominant hand. Vanessa is notoriously left-handed. Look at her wrist. Darian zoomed in further. Just peeking out from the cuff of the yellow raincoat was the glint of a watch strap. She wears her watch on her right wrist, Darian observed, his eyes widening in realization. Because she's left-handed. Exactly. I wear my Apple Watch on my left wrist, I said, a fierce, triumphant smile breaking through my exhaustion. It's circumstantial, but it's a crack in the armor. It's not enough to break the DA's case, Darian warned, though his tone was energized. Harrington will just argue you used your left hand because you were disoriented from the airbag deploying. We need to shatter her alibi. We need to prove she wasn't at the Starlight Diner. The Starlight Diner was a greasy spoon on NW 23rd Ave, notorious for its late-night crowd and perpetually broken security cameras. Detective Harrington claimed Vanessa was working a double shift there, with 12 witnesses and a time card, to prove she was serving milkshakes when Theo Kensington was nearly killed. The next morning, I hired Frank Russo. Frank was a private investigator Darian frequently used for difficult cases. He was a retired Portland PD detective who had spent 20 years working Vice. A man who looked like he had smoked 3 packs a day since birth and knew every dark corner of the city. We met him in a secluded booth at a diner across town. I handed Frank the rest of my dwindling savings in a manila envelope. I need you to break the Starlight Diner, I told him. Frank didn't say a word. He just pocketed the envelope and nodded. For 3 agonizing days, I remained under house arrest, jumping at every shadow, terrified the police were coming back to revoke my bail. Theo Kensington remained in a medically induced coma at OHSU. Every night, I prayed for the man I had never met, desperate for him to wake up and tell the police who had actually driven the car that hit him. On Sunday afternoon, Frank Russo called Darien, who immediately drove to my house. "Frank found the weak link," Darien announced, dropping a thick file onto my kitchen counter. He looked exhilarated. "The Starlight Diner uses an antiquated punch card system. No biometrics, no manager override. Just a piece of cardboard you shove into a slot. So anyone could have punched her card," I said. "Exactly. But the witnesses? The 12 people who swore they saw her?" Frank interviewed them. 8 of them were drunk college students who couldn't tell you what color the waitress's hair was, let alone her face. 2 of them were regulars who assumed it was Vanessa because her name was on the schedule. "And the last 2? I asked. "The cook, a guy named Hector, and another waitress named Brianna," Darien said, pulling out a photograph of a young, heavily pierced girl smoking a cigarette outside the diner. Frank dug into Brianna. "Turns out, she has a nasty habit of buying prescription painkillers off the street, painkillers that Vanessa just so happens to have a very steady supply of from her slip and fall injury." A cold thrill of vindication shot down my spine. Vanessa paid her off. Vanessa gave Brianna 2 bottles of OxyContin to wear her name tag, work her section in the dim lighting, and clock out for her at 2 a.m., Darien confirmed, tapping the photo. Frank leaned on Brianna hard, mentioned accessory to attempted murder. "She broke in 10 minutes. She's willing to give a sworn statement to the DA tomorrow morning." I collapsed against the kitchen counter, burying my face in my hands, sobbing tears of absolute relief. The alibi was dead. The police would have to look at Vanessa. "But we have one more problem," Darien said gently, his hand resting warmly on my shoulder. His touch was the first genuinely comforting thing I had felt in a week. "Brianna's testimony destroys the alibi. But it doesn't put Vanessa behind the wheel of your car. It just proves she lied about where she was." He was right. Knowing she wasn't at work wasn't the same as proving she was the one who hit Kensington. We needed irrefutable proof that she was in that car. "Dominic," I said suddenly, lifting my head. "Who?" "Vanessa's boyfriend, Dominic," I said, my mind racing back to the day Vanessa came to my house. "He's a mechanic. He owns a shady chop shop out in Gresham. When Vanessa came over to regroup and stole my keys, she was texting him frantically. If she was going to use my car to commit a hit and run, she wouldn't have just driven it blindly. She would have had Dominic disable my car's GPS tracker." Darien stared at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "If Dominic touched that car before the crash, his fingerprints, or his digital signature from the diagnostic tool, will be all over the onboard computer," I finished. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to introduce my sister to a little concept called karma. The following morning, Darien filed an emergency ex parte motion to halt any further processing of my impounded Camry by the Portland Police Bureau. We needed our own expert to look at the car's brain before Detective Harrington's team inadvertently wiped the delicate digital cache. Darien brought in Dr. Elliot Fowler, an automotive forensics specialist who consulted for federal agencies. Armed with a court order, Dr. Fowler marched into the police impound lot with a heavy steel briefcase, accompanied by a very disgruntled Detective Harrington. While we waited in Darien's mahogany-paneled conference room, the silence was agonizing. Every tick of the antique grandfather clock in the corner felt like a hammer against my skull. I kept picturing Vanessa, my own sister, sitting in her apartment, probably drinking a matcha latte and browsing online for luxury vacations she planned to fund with my destruction. At 2 p.m., Darien's phone rang. He put it on speaker. "I have it." Dr. Fowler's voice crackled through the line, vibrating with professional excitement. "The Toyota's engine control unit is a fortress, but aftermarket diagnostic tools always leave muddy footprints. At exactly 10:14 p.m. on Tuesday, an hour and a half before the collision, a third-party OBD2 scanner was plugged into the port under the steering wheel. "Did it wipe the GPS?" Darian asked, leaning over the desk. "It tried," Fowler corrected. "It disabled the active tracking broadcast. But here is the beautiful part about cheap, pirated mechanic software. It auto-logs its own hardware ID into the car's shadow memory to bypass the firewall. I extracted the tool's registered MAC address and its software license holder. My breath hitched in my throat. "Who is it registered to?" "A commercial account," Fowler said, the smile evident in his voice. "Registered to a business called Dom's Elite Performance in Gresham. Dominic." The room seemed to tilt. We had her. We finally had the physical link proving my car had been tampered with by Vanessa's boyfriend right before the crash. Darian didn't waste a single second. He immediately called the district attorney. By 5 p.m., Portland PD raided Dominic's auto shop. Facing 20 years as an accessory to attempted vehicular manslaughter and insurance fraud, Dominic's loyalty to my sister evaporated in record time. He folded like a wet napkin in the interrogation room. Dominic confessed everything on tape. He admitted that Vanessa brought him the stolen spare key on Tuesday afternoon. He admitted to using his diagnostic tablet to kill the car's cellular link so the police couldn't track its movements. He even admitted that Vanessa's plan was to hit Theo Kensington to stop him from testifying at her fraud hearing, and she had specifically dressed in my yellow raincoat to ensure any eyewitnesses would point the finger at me. But I didn't want Vanessa to just be arrested in her apartment. I needed her to look me in the eye when her house of cards collapsed. The next morning, Darian arranged a meeting at the downtown offices of Mr. Caldwell, the probate attorney managing the Hastings Trust. We told Caldwell only that there was an urgent development regarding the morality clause. Caldwell, duty-bound, summoned Vanessa. I sat in the plush leather chair in Caldwell's boardroom, staring at the heavy oak doors. At exactly 10 a.m., they swung open. Vanessa walked in wearing a tailored designer suit she couldn't possibly afford, a look of profound, arrogant mourning plastered across her face. She saw me and feigned a gasp, clutching her designer handbag. "Jessica! Oh my God! What are you doing here?" she cried, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I thought you were in jail. I've been so worried sick about you. Have you?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I didn't recognize the coldness in my own tone. "Of course. It's a tragedy," Vanessa said, turning to Mr. Caldwell with a theatrical sigh. "But Mr. Caldwell, we have business to discuss. Given my sister's current felony charges, the morality clause of our grandfather's trust is active. As the sole remaining eligible beneficiary, I need to initiate the transfer of the $1.4 million. She couldn't even wait for a conviction. Her greed was a bottomless pit. "There won't be a transfer, Vanessa," Darian said, stepping out from the corner of the room where he had been standing in the shadows. Vanessa's fake smile faltered. "Excuse me, who are you?" Before Darian could answer, the door to the adjoining private office clicked open. Detective Harrington stepped out, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The smug look he had worn during my interrogation was completely gone, replaced by a rigid, professional fury. Vanessa froze, her eyes darting frantically between me, Darian, and the police. "What is this?" "Dominic says, hello," I said quietly, leaning forward. "He told them about the diagnostic tool. Vanessa. He told them about the OxyContin you gave Brianna at the diner. He told them everything." I watched the color drain from her face in real time. The arrogant facade shattered, leaving behind nothing but the terrified, manipulative little girl she had always been. She took a step backward toward the door, but the uniformed officers were already moving. "Vanessa Harper," Detective Harrington barked, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the metal clinking together sent a violent shiver down my spine, echoing my own nightmare from just days prior. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and leaving the scene of an accident." "No," No, you're lying. She set me up. Vanessa screamed, thrashing wildly as the officers grabbed her arms, forcing them behind her back. Save it for the precinct. Harrington said the exact words the officer had used on me. As they dragged my sister out of the boardroom, her screams echoing down the marble hallway, I felt a heavy, suffocating weight lift off my chest. The nightmare was finally over. The universe had a funny way of balancing the scales, ensuring that the very trap she dug for me became her own permanent cage. It took 6 months for my life to resemble anything normal. Theo Kensington survived and made a full recovery, his testimony sealing my sister's fate. Vanessa was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, her greed costing her not just the Hastings inheritance, which reverted entirely to me, but her freedom. I finally moved out of Portland, leaving the wreckage behind, proving that the truth always leaves a trace.